Hello, my name is Grayson. I use any pronouns and I identify as trans. I am also a poet, as some of you know, but today I want to share something I put together that is poem adjacent, but not quite a poem. Rather, it is a poetic compilation of thoughts and feelings expressed to me by other trans people in my life around the theme of each person's unique connection to their gender. I ask them to relate it to something, make it metaphorical, or describe it in whatever way they can. So this is called Poeticizing Gender. For me, I'd compare my gender to a coloring book. Sometimes I describe it as forgotten in a desk drawer somewhere with the packaging still on, or lost in a move, or on a journey of being left behind and found, marked by many different crayons held by many different hands. Sometimes it is brand new and shiny, placed on a shelf, waiting. In all of these metaphors, it is never fully filled in. This coloring book is not a personification, it is not a living thing, it feels nothing about being left behind, being unfinished. It cannot feel the weight of being perceived as less. This is my gender. For others, like Kai, who uses they, it pronouns, gender is not solid or still, it is changing, like the weather. Some days it is raining and pouring, and then 10 minutes later it is sunny and hot. Nebraska, am I right? Kai doesn't choose to put a label on their gender because they feel as though they cannot define it. It doesn't think it will ever will. Levi, who uses they, them pronouns, describes their gender as like a Studio Ghibli film, handcrafted and filled with painstaking amounts of details that most people may never even notice. They themselves don't even notice all of them. Their story and their gender just flows through the scenes and stories as easy as the Kohaku River. Jade, who uses she, her pronouns, describes her gender as a fuzzy photograph. It is just barely out of focus enough to be indecipherable. An anonymous person on Tumblr says their experience with gender is like these floaters in your eyes after looking at a sky or a bright light. It is something they see more than innately feel. One non-binary person named Leaves says, "My gender is like that moment when you realize you can't feel the organs inside your body. I can feel each individual finger on my hands, but I can't feel my kidneys or intestines or any other vital thing." A trans man named Aiden notes how his gender can grant him more privilege, but drag him down at the same time. He says, "My gender is like a copy of a key, accepted by the masses for its appearance and ability to grant me access to certain places and objects, but the discovery of its unoriginal design receives the notion that it is not true, and thus not accepted as one would the original copy." Another trans man is closeted and does not currently have male privilege. Quote, "I find that the gender I am on the inside is like a life parallel to mine. He is a ghost living in my skin that takes voyages out to imagine what my life could be like. I see him in other people, other places when I go out, in guys at class who sit with their legs kicked way out or can walk past my building late at night laughing with friends." Marlowe says, to quote, "To me, gender is a song that lays under my skin and flesh. It hums a tune only I can hear completely, but grows louder when I am safe. Eventually, it'll never have to hide quietly all the way beneath my skin and around my bones. Eventually, I plan to let it sing loud and clear for the rest of my life." Alexander, a trans man who uses he, him, shares that for years when he was a kid, he existed without really thinking about gender at all. He says, recalling those times, "I do not regret my time as a naive child. I almost envy their ability to exist without as much pressure as I live with now. I feel as if there was less pressure, I would probably express much more fluidly, but I am happy with the man I am becoming." Vera, a trans woman who uses she, her, says, "For me, transitioning felt like a new person taking charge of who I used to be. The moment I realized I was transgender, I realized that who I was before served their purpose. And from the experiences of that person, I learned who I need to be now." Some trans people describe their gender as being shaped by those around them or their past experiences. One person says that they are an automation of love and memory, crafted by those who cared for them, scrapped by the ones who didn't. Pieces are torn out and missing, and yet still they function. Gears catching on the things that they love and those things they love and have left behind. Another person details their connection to gender as an endless summer day when you're 8 years old and everything feels possible. You decide to build a fort and forage snacks in the garden, and soon you're inventing your own magical secret societies until the fireflies start blinking evening songs from the grass. For others, gender can be spiritual. Oliver Apollo, who uses he, they, says, "I would describe my gender as being a somewhat sacred balance of masculine and feminine." Nick, who is trans femme and mainly uses she, her, describes her gender as somewhat angelic, as in, it's a bit scary to think about because it is beyond human comprehension. Her gender is something only God can understand. She doesn't even understand it herself. For many trans people, their gender does not fall into any one specific category, just like how this piece is not neatly defined as poetry. It is imperative to respect the experiences of people who are different than you, because though you may think you know them, you do not know the full story. This work is here to give you a small glimpse into the various trans experiences, but it is still only a snippet. If there is one thing you should take away from this, it is that each trans experience is vastly different from the next. Be open to appreciating the beauty of it all. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Khan. I'm 12 years old and I'm going into 7th grade. I'm here today to tell my story and why pride is important to me. I have 2 moms and a little brother. I also have many close family and friends that are part of the LGBTQIA community. So growing up, I was taught that accepting everyone was the norm. In the past couple of years, many events showed me that some people do not agree with us. For example, about 2 years back, I was at a camp and I made a new friend. We were talking about our lives, and she asked me why I didn't mention my dad. I told her about my mom's, and she gave me a disgusted look. She told me that she didn't support people like me and walked away. I was mortified. I never experienced someone that judging me by my family and who I choose to support. I felt anger, sadness, and fear all at the same time. But this wasn't the only time I felt this. We always hang a trans flag and a pride flag outside of our house. One day, I was coming home from swim team, and I noticed that the trans flag was gone. I took a closer look and realized that it was completely ripped off. Why would someone do this? Would they take a pride flag the next day? Were we safe? All of these questions were spiraling through my head. When I told my mom, she said that we would just keep buying new flags every time someone steals it. After that, I realized that I shouldn't be scared, but instead be inspired to make more change. To hold your head up high, even in times of struggle. To lift people up and show them that they have a safe place to be. To have pride. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. My name is Melanie Peltz, and I am a lesbian. And even after nearly 14 years of marriage, being out for a long time, and with a supportive church like Urban Abbey, it is still awkward for me every single time I come out. In my life, Pride Month and Pride generally has deepened its roots of necessity. Pride is about magnifying and appreciating the frequent, unplanned, redemptive experiences that come from leaning in and telling my and our stories. Pride reminds me to enjoy the daily celebrations. But in an election year, unfortunately, that's harder than it sounds. Being an ally or advocate, stepping out in fragility or out of fragility and out of hiding and into pride and marching with others is not easy. And how do we find these others with whom you can march? It requires sitting with the discomfort and challenge of telling our stories. So here's a fun story, one you've probably heard, maybe heard, but it bears repeating. I like to call this one, when your safest place is in a van down by the river. Back on April 30th, 2010, my wife, Lori Long, asked me to marry her. I know, it's weird. She didn't ask me to commitment ceremony her. It was a weird time in America. Some states welcomed this gay marriage idea and some didn't. Seems like history repeats itself in some of the worst ways, I guess, but I digress. Marriage wasn't an option for us in Nebraska, but there was this little safe gem across the river, Iowa. A lesbian couple's field of dreams. See what I did there? In this chapter of our lives, you'll hear a lot about safe spaces and relationships and some not so safe spaces and relationships. The challenge you have this morning is to identify where you might have fit in this story of a couple faithful church-going gals just trying to make a lifelong promise to one another. And we have several family of choice in this room who are with us on that whole journey. We decided to get small married in Iowa and have a big wedding, not wedding, but celebration of a wedding in Nebraska. Ta-da, problem solved. It would mean multiple parties, which wasn't Lori's favorite plan, but was certainly mine. When we told Pastors Deborah and Pastors Jane about our engagement, they were wholly thrilled and deeply concerned. So they had to strategize what we were going to do in order to be successful and actually have a wedding. We couldn't put their frocks at risk, so we needed to find an officiant. We wanted to keep Deborah and Jane from harm's way so they could continue to create safe spaces for others so they couldn't marry us. Our retired minister friend couldn't risk his pension, so that was a no. Our rabbi friend wasn't going to be in town, that was a no. Our Episcopalian church priest couldn't risk her job, so that was a no. Our Church of Christ minister friend couldn't help us out on the date we had previously planned, so that was a no. And I wasn't even going to ask my Presbyterian minister father. It seemed that for all the churches and synagogues and chapels in Omaha, no one could marry us. But here's where pastors in progressive churches make a way where there is no way, and where proximity to Iowa has an advantage. Pastor Jane and Pastor Deborah strategized us right into matrimony. Let's get you married after a holiday ecumenical service, grab the Church of Christ minister, pile all of us into Mama McKnight's minivan, drive down to the river, cross the pedestrian bridge, say your I do's, get the documents signed by folks who could on a date that worked for all the official people. And you guys, Lori and I got married in a van down by the river. And if you've watched Saturday Night Live, you know why that is equal parts hilarious and frustrating, and yet somehow safe. We ended up having 2 more wedding celebration parties, and we celebrate all 3 of those dates between the 2 of us. Pride is about infusing the celebration, particularly right now, and always right now, into the mundane. Adding glitter to the grind and rainbows to the regular, and showing up to tell our stories over and over again. Because facing my fears is much more interesting when I can support other queer folks and gather a network of straight allies. I tell you all of this to remind you and remind me that safe spaces emerge in spite of the dangerous and risky places in which we might live. Safety comes from grace, comes from love, and comes from an unwillingness to be unsafe. So it is for you to remember. Pride is not just in finding, but in being the safe spaces for our community, for folks in the margins. Granting permission to and advocating for people who will live life wildly and weirdly, simply because they are parents who let their son wear barrettes or sparkly pink sequin shoes, or they are a young person who wants to shave their head. Pride is remembering every day that love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God. And as far as Jesus is concerned, I'll bet he thinks, the weirder the love, the more it is of me. Fly those flags, babies. Make it weird. May we have the courage. May it be so. Amen.